Hi, I'm Andy Hunt, here to answer your question, what is Agile? Well, that's a good question. Let's start by going back to 2001 in February, when a group of 17 like-minded folks, for the most part, got together to try to answer that very question, saying each of us individually had been doing work in software development that was non-traditional, not the way people had been doing it up until now. So a bunch of us got together to try to hammer out some commonality in our various approaches, our various philosophies, to try to determine a better way forward for the industry. And that resulted in the Manifesto for Agile Software Development at agilemanifesto.org. We specified what we thought were the most important things about this new way of developing software, that individuals and interactions were more important, that working software that you could actually use was more important, that collaborating with customers, with other people in the organization was more important, that responding to change, embracing change even, was more important. Now, why did we feel it was necessary to have to say these things? The problem was then, and the problem remains today, that many corporations, many organizations are set up along sort of 19th century lines. They have sort of a 19th century operating system for their company, where strategy gets set at the very top, power trickles down, managers assess how well you do, you're tightly bound by rules of what you can and cannot do. It's a very linear, very naive approach, kind of like horse and buggy. And you notice in the old days, they would physically put blinders on horses so they couldn't see what was going on and just head straight down the road. Well, that doesn't always work well in today's environments. We need something more of a 21st century operating system for companies. So instead of a horse and buggy with blinders on the horse, we need something more like a Segway, right? What is the chief fundamental characteristic of a Segway? No matter how you lean on it, no matter the terrain, uphill, downhill, turning, whatever, it instantly corrects and adjusts for your circumstances to keep you upright and keep you moving. That's what we want Agile development to be. Because the world is volatile. It's uncertain. It's ambiguous. We have to make small attempts at work. We have to work in small batches with small, stable teams with short cycles and a lot of feedback quickly. Can you imagine trying to ride a Segway and not getting feedback from its sensors for a week or 6 months or 2 years later? You'd fall in the ditch. You need feedback in real time right now so you can correct and keep going. That is what we want to see with agility. Contrary to popular belief, Agile is not Scrum. It's not extreme programming or Lean or DevOps. It's not a tool like Jira or any other number of tools. All these are tools to help you do your job. They are not Agile. So what is Agile? In the book Practices of an Agile Developer, that I wrote with my co-author Venkat Subramaniam, I came up with this definition, since we didn't have one commonly available, to say that Agile development uses feedback to make constant adjustments in a highly collaborative environment. Now look at some of the key words here. Feedback, constant adjustments, collaboration. Those are the hallmarks of an Agile approach. And there's a great real-world example of this, not related to software at all, but in the Netherlands, there's this experiment with a shared space traffic plan that emphasized human interaction and negotiation. They took away the signs. They took away the lanes. As a result, you could not just fly through this intersection on autopilot. You actually had to think. You actually had to interact, make eye contact with other motorists, with pedestrians, with bicyclists. Early results showed accidents dropped something like 90% because you couldn't just go on autopilot. You had to actually react to the situation as it was unfolding every single time. That's a large part of Agile, taking away autopilot and actually reacting to the real world. The other biggest aspect to Agile, I think, is the fact that there are no big episodes. There's no big meeting. There's no giant integration point. There's no big release. Everything is small. Everything is continuous. And the reason for that is so that we can get fast, constant feedback. Otherwise, you're trying to determine what something is like before you've ever gotten there. So, for instance, in the 1902 film, A Trip to the Moon, we had really a rather different idea of what the moon was like. No one had been. They envisioned these sort of insectoid creatures, and you would shoot your way up to the moon in a giant bullet. Interesting fantasy. It wasn't until we actually got to the moon, till we actually studied the moon, that we realized many of these ideas, no, it's not made of cheese. Many of our ideas were incorrect, but you had to be there to study it to determine that. So you need the feedback to prevent fantasy. And unfortunately, this is what happens with software development all the time. We're big on the fantasy. Oh, it's going to be just like this. It's going to have insect people, and the topography will look like this. The scenery will look like that. And it doesn't. You have to get there to know what it looks like. One of the things that I advocated in the book, The Pragmatic Programmer, that Dave Thomas and I wrote back at the turn of the century, was this notion of tracer bullets. Now, in riflery or artillery, a tracer bullet is a round that lights up. So when you're shooting at a target, it doesn't matter what the wind conditions are. It doesn't matter if the target's moving. You get real-time feedback. Wherever you're aiming, you can visually visually corroborate where the ordnance is landing and adjust in real time. Real-time, real-world conditions. That's how you want to develop software. Consider it this way. Instead of building a bridge sort of one chunk at a time and hoping all the parts line up when you get there, not knowing what the river bottom is like, not knowing wind conditions, etc., do it like they built the Golden Gate. You start with just a couple cables. You start with one cable anchored on each end. Add a few more cables. But use that to build out more, to flesh it out. Before you know it, everything's shiny. You've got an actual bridge. That's the sort of technique that we want to see in software development. You don't try to build the whole thing at once or necessarily plan out. You do one small piece at a time and build up from there. And this gets us to the notion of iterative development. Too many teams waste effort trying to get it right the first time. That's a total waste of time. You want to get it right the last time. You will never get it right the first time because you can't. There's no feedback. You have to do something, see how users use it, see how the system reacts under load. You have to learn from the evolving system and then make corrections, make changes, get it right. The problem is, I think this is poorly understood outside of software development, but good designs, good code require multiple attempts. You can't just sit down and type it and, quote, get it right the first time. You have to type something, try it, get feedback, go from there. And indeed, in agility, we want feedback in all things. It's part of the entire environment. Real feedback under real conditions, not just for developers. And we see this in other parts of the organization, right? Advertising, UX and UI, they put proposals in front of people. They run tests. They do A/B testing. That's how they answer questions. That's the same way we answer questions in software, because we don't know the answers. We don't know how people will react. We don't know how the system will react. So we put it in front of them and we test it. We test it continuously. We use continuous development. Because contrary to popular belief, development does not happen in discrete phases. You don't do the design up first in isolation and then testing and integration and release and lawsuit and reorg. A lot of folks follow that strategy, but that's really not the way to do it. So instead of the sort of traditional approach of building in layers, where you might even have separate teams doing these different portions of the application, instead, what you want is like the cables over the bridge. You want an end-to-end vertical slice. Now, maybe it doesn't do anything real. Maybe it's hard-coded data. It's just a stub. It took 5 minutes to put together, but that stubbed-out feature goes end-to-end. It goes all the way from the GUI to the database with all the parts in between. But it's one very thin slice. And then, as with the bridge, you build out from there. The teams focus on learning the business domain, learning the application, learning the dynamics of the team themselves. We want to see dynamic chats between team members and users and sponsors, not static memos. We want to grow shared understanding, not documentation that sits on a shelf and never gets read. We want the team members to sync up with each other and understand what they're working on. That's the purpose of something like the Scrum stand-up meeting. It's short. It's for the team to synchronize their operations. It's not a status report to the top brass. It's for the team. Managers are there to help remove obstacles, keep the team moving forward. We want to push information out so everyone can be aware of it, not have to pull it in. The schedule is a large topic. I've got other videos on that. But the thing is, you're iterating the code. The schedule is going to iterate as well, because you need feedback, again, from experience with this team on this project under these conditions. That's real data that you can actually forecast from. If you change even one team member, that creates a whole new team with different dynamics. We want small, stable teams that don't have a rotating cast of characters, because then your data becomes invalid, basically. And remember, deadlines are constraints. They're not goals. An Agile approach is different. Even where we know that it's better, that doesn't necessarily mean it'll be readily adopted. There was this wonderful quote from the not-so-distant past where a practitioner said that this will ever come into general use is extremely doubtful. It requires much time and goes a good bit of trouble, both to the patient and the practitioner. It is foreign and opposed to all of our habits and associations. He was, of course, describing the stethoscope in the 1800s. Needless to say, the stethoscope did go on to become a very popular tool, along with other diagnostic tools, even if they seemed foreign and opposite to your habits and associations to begin with. That's the short overview of an Agile approach. I heartily recommend you give it a try. You don't have to. You can always, of course, use the same old methods and experience the same old outcomes. I'm Andy Hunt. Thanks for listening.